Possiamo iniziare. Un benvenuto a tutti.
Welcome, welcome to everyone on behalf of the meeting's organizers and on my behalf. And I would like to thank our guests who accepted our invitation to come here today to talk about a theme that is not easy to tackle. As you see, our Italian Minister of Justice should have been here. Unfortunately, he had an unforeseen commitment, but he left, or he sent us a message which I would like to read immediately as an introduction to our event. I'd like to thank the meeting's organizers for the invitation, writes Minister Orlando. I am deeply sorry that I cannot be with you today because of an institutional commitment that has come up. And I would like to share with you some reflections. The extraordinary words by Goethe that are the title of the meeting this year on the importance of the legacy point at our relationship with the politics and society. To inherit in the most profound meaning that it is suggested by Goethe means to make relations concrete, means that you know that there was someone before you and that someone will come after you. Let's think about our relation to constitutional rights. Each generation needs to confirm them with facts to show in a concrete way their progress and their application. The meaning of legacy is linked with the theme end of sentence and alternative forms of sentence. And this is also the theme of the book by Elvio Fassone. I will be talking about this later on. So what kind of legacy can we think of in front of a never-ending sentence? Fassone shows that it is possible to create relationships, to get close to a prisoner, even if there is a huge gap at the beginning. Writing in the book and in books and in life is a way to get closer to the other, because, well, actually, the book talks about an exchange of letters between Dr. Fassone and a jail prisoner. Time can have a meaning only if we insert the social element in our idea of sentence. In recent years, we have started an important path for a concept of sentence that is aimed at resocialization in a real strategy of recovery from the criminal execution to the criminal process. The exchange and the legal processing of on this theme was at the center of our attention. This is a field where the word subsidiarity is really concrete in cooperation with the different institutions of the state and the relationship with the public. That is why we have supported innovative experiences, as for instance in the Institute Lorusso and Cotugno in Turin. The book by Fassone tells a story of a very strong relationship that actually changes both participants and is actually aimed at the readers and at institutions. It tells us of the need to change perspective and to fill up the time spent in prison with the social paths, so we can actually take back this meaning of a relationship only through a path of humanization that our society needs to take upon itself. This is the same path that Pope Francis indicated in his meetings with the prisoners in jail, with the gesture, the right of the monde, and in his words to the prisoners. Minister Andrea Orlando. So why did I say that this message by the minister helps me introducing today's session? Well, because this session, whose title is End of Sentence and Alternative Sentence Forms, is in a way, well, explained in a way by the title of the book by Dr. Fassone. The book is entitled The End of Sentence, Now. So this book gave us the idea of today's meeting, because personally, well, I believe this is a really interesting book, but it is also very useful for everyone. And this book makes us think, makes us reflect on the need in our country for a reflection has emerged this morning in the meeting that was chaired by Luca Marta Cartabia, that it is necessary to think about justice, about sentences, and on the relationship between the operators in the field of justice and the so-called negative protagonists of justice, this is to say, people who have committed crimes. So, well, so there is the need to think about a lifelong sentence, for instance, and this is a form of sentence that is obviously very strong, because the prisoner will have to spend their own life in their whole life in a prison. So I will introduce the book by Fassone from two points of view. From a methodological point of view first. For those who will read it, well, I do not want to dwell on the content, because then the author will talk about this experience that he has lived, that is to say, 20 years of exchange of letters with this prisoner who Fassone himself condemned, sentenced to life prison, and this relationship makes him think, makes him reflect upon the meaning of a sentence, of a life sentence in particular, and makes him discover the humanity of this prisoner in a relationship that makes him know more about his life, the life of this prisoner, who actually opens up his soul to him, who is maybe his greatest enemy, but at the same time the only friend is left. So what is this method? Well, it is based on coming to know the other person, and in the end there are some legal considerations as well, and it also proposes alternatives to life sentence. In particular, in this case, since this prison was sentenced because of crimes linked with organized criminality, life sentence, the life sentence that we are talking about is a particular kind of life sentence that is foreseen for certain kind of crimes linked with mafia, terrorism, sexual crimes, and all these all the aspects that are linked with, for instance, particular rewards that are given to prisoners cannot be given or rather can be given only through very complex and difficult processes and paths. And an important theme is that if you want to be, if the prisoner wants to obtain freedom upon condition, after 26 years in this case, that can be asked for only if the prisoner has always had really a perfect, an excellent record of his stay in prison. And so for 5 years you would be object to security measures, and after 5 years, so 31 years in all, the prisoner is free for life. So, this is not possible for prisoners who have been sentenced for the kind of crimes I was listing before. The only possible way for them to obtain this for them is that of helping the justice and the judges to investigate in further crimes. So this is quite difficult because, it is the person that has to decide whether he or she wants to accuse someone else with his words. So this is a method, in a way, that is to say, to really come to know the other person in order to be able to think about this person and to think about eventual and possible alternatives to life sentence that are not abstract alternatives but are really based on experience. And in the book, you will find that the author is really cautious when in the final part of the book, when he talks about life sentence and when he says that he is not convinced that this is a suitable sentence, but he is really cautious and he says, well, maybe I have been really influenced in my reasoning by this relationship with this prisoner. But I can say that this kind of method is the only viable method to really be able to find new solutions. So to create a relationship with the people living in prison. How do these people live? Then I have a second suggestion.
Arrivo, Lo traggo da una frase contenuta proprio alla fine del libro, una frase di Silvia Giacomoni.
And I quote Silvia Giacomoni, and who was present this morning at our event here at the meeting. This is an aspect that emerged many, many times because it is really the element that makes the difference here. And I quote, "Prison is the sentence for something that should not have been done, but the person is more than one single gesture in one single fact, be it a good fact or an evil fact." This means that men cannot be defined by the sins they commit. So this is actually the challenge that we are going to face today here. Are we sure that men can change? Even those men who have committed terrible deeds. We have a lot of examples, luckily, of people who have changed. So we really need to be to have the intelligence, the vision, the flexibility to change the whole system, that judicial system, in order to go and create a benefit for everyone involved, and also in the interest of the victims. And I say this with great respect. So we have to to give back to society people who have understood their mistakes, who wanted to make up for what they did, for the time they've lost, and who want to contribute in building a better society. So, well, these are people that obviously need to have really changed. And in this case, again, I will go back to an episode that is recounted in the book. It is called The No Children. And here the protagonist, Salvatore, sends a picture in a letter to Fassone, a picture of 4 children. He says these are children who are very close to each other in terms of age. They have a fair gaze, as if they knew already that you needed to make yourself respected in life. And Salvatore says these are his nephews. He says that the father of the children is in prison, and the mother cannot really manage the 4 children. They do not respect anybody, says Salvatore. I should be there with them because they would listen to him with good or bad manners. But I'm here in prison, and I already know that they will not end well. If I were there, I would tell them that they need to learn, to study, and to work, because otherwise they will finish in prison just like I did. So these are people who want to make up for lost time and could actually participate in constructing a new civilization. So this is exactly our common goal. Now, I would like to ask to Dr. Fassone, to Elvio Fassone, to tell us this beautiful story, because this is exactly the best way for us to understand the limits of, as well as the negative repercussions of our system. So we need this kind of stories, and we need people that are ready to change the system. Who's Elvio Fassone? He was a magistrate in Turin. In this case, he was a president of the court for very serious offenses, and he was part of the High Council of Magistrates. He was a member of the Senate from 1996 to 2006, and is the author of this beautiful book. You have the word.
I would like to sincerely thank you for having me. Thank you for your wonderful introduction to me. And I would like to thank you for the positive judgment of my book. Well, I was quite surprised by by the reactions to my book. The book does not tell a story, or if there is a story, it is a very thin one. Yet, the book had such a feedback that led me to think that it evidently touched upon some important points. And I will try and focus on some of the key points by reminding you of some of the answers of people who have read the book. The first remark I would like to make is refers to the length of this correspondence. When I wrote the book, I had been writing with the other protagonists of the book for 26 years, and we've been in contact for 29 years now. If you think that the so celebrated correspondence between Marina Peteva and Boris Pasternak only lasted 14 years in the 1920s and 1930s. But this has lasted more than double the time, well, 29 years now. So it's over 1/3 of the average life. And this duration is really astounding, and it reminds us that the detention of one of the two protagonists has been lasting for 29 years. This is an important feature. The second consideration, the second remark made by the readers is refers to the quality, the features of the two subjects. Not only are we talking about a judge and an inmate. In this case, we're talking about an inmate condemned to a life imprisonment and the judge who condemned him to life imprisonment, and the judge who is still accompanying him during his imprisonment. So the inmate is still alive after 34 years of imprisonment. So the features, the qualities, the characteristics of these two subjects evidently touched upon important keys of our feelings. Then the third interesting point is that at the beginning the story was a positive story. As positive as you may expect from a long-lasting detention. At the beginning, there was a sort of conversion. I will not make any comparison with one of the famous characters of Manzoni's book, I Promessi Sposi. However, it was a chief of a criminal organization who, after a gesture, decides to change his way to look at the existence. However, this story, which starts positively and then has a positive evolution, at a certain point it gets blocked because of a series of negative circumstances which should not be attributed to the bad will of one person or the other. It's the simple rolling of things which were not followed, which were not the focus of attention in order to overcome difficulties. So events simply rolled and continued. So Salvatore, for 10, 15, 20 years, managed to keep the promise he had made to me at the beginning, but at a certain point, he no longer manages to continue on the right path after another crime. Salvatore decides to commit suicide. But he is saved by the prompt intervention by one of the prison officers. And so Salvatore continued to write to me more or less every month. And at a certain point, he wrote to me, "Dear President, last week I did something bad. I hung myself, full stop. I am sorry. Please forgive me. I will not do it again." And then another full stop. These were the words of a person apologizing for having tried to commit suicide. Well, when I read these words, I touched with my hands the abyss of anguish that Salvatore must have lived. At that time, he was young. When he was condemned, he was 26. Whereas today he is 58. And so then I took the decision, I decided to write this story, because when I was faced with this abyss of desperation and this willingness that has manifested itself and that had not been understood, well, I thought that I had to do something. But what could I do as a retired judge? Well, what I could do was telling this story. Because talking about a suffering means starting to sort of make up for it. And so I think I wrote the book in about 2 or 3 weeks. I read 2 or 3 letters every day, and I included important parts of these letters into the book. And so in this way, I managed to recall these 26 years. 26 years, and I focused on the hopes, on the meaning of the gesture, the action. Well, I made the action. I decided to write the book, but I was, well, my writing was recommended to me by my wife. You know that women have a particular sensitivity. So after the incredibly pressing stress that I had felt, it was a trial with 242 people with charges, and the sentence was issued after more or less 1 month. So we lived as prisoners while we were deciding on the sentence. And so what came to my mind is a second of 2 sort of snapshots. They are meaningful and they are important. I already said that Salvatore was the head of this crime association. So not only charged with 15 homicides, but he was also the point of reference of evil contained in that scenario, in that environment. So at the beginning, his attitude was very hostile. He was very aggressive at the beginning of the trial. But then the situation little by little changed after 1 single episode. Salvatore, in one of the first weeks of the trial, came and asked me a permit to go and visit his mother, who was seriously ill. The judge might have given this permit, but considering the subject with the necessary guarantees. So I told him, I will give you the permit, but I need to give you the permit provided you have vigilance with you. And he asked me, do you have a mother? I said, yes, I have a mother, and my mother is also ill as yours. And so he said, you cannot send me to my mother who is dying with 2 carabinieri, with 2 representatives of the armed forces at my sides. Well, the judge, I decided to run a risk. And well, the person charged, he might have decided to escape. Well, the accused, the indicted, decided not to flee, not to escape, and he came back from his visit, and I could read in his lips, I've come back. So that was a first episode. I trusted him, and he came back from the visit. He decided not to escape. That was a first thing that I've learned. From time to time, you need to go out of your role. You need to go out of your you need to do something else, something different, and you need to run the risk. Another episode was on the eve of the sentence, more or less. Salvatore, well, the climate in about 20 months of duration of the trial had changed. Salvatore came to me, and at a certain point he asked me, President, do you have a child? And I answered, I have 3 children. The oldest is your age, more or less. And he answered, I know. I wanted to tell you that if your son had born where I was born, he would probably be at my place now. And if I had born where your kid was born, I would probably be a lawyer, and a good one. So you may well understand what he wanted to convey, the message he wanted to convey to me. So it's a kind of a lottery. Life is a lottery. You pick a ticket, and Salvatore simply had picked the wrong ticket of the lottery. But in addition to that, I also read a further message. He was offering to become my spiritual child. Maybe it's too romantic. However, this message remained in my soul. And after the sentence, I continued to be deeply unsatisfied. And so my wife simply went over conventions, and she simply recommended me to write him. Please write to him. Write what you feel. And I decided to write something very simple, which could be summarized in a picture. What you have before you is your life. In any case, try and live it as best as you can, although it's very difficult. You may be deprived of your liberty for a long period of time, but there are two things nobody can take away from you: dignity and hope, if you want. Incredibly, well, I wasn't expecting him to answer to my letter, or rudely. Well, he answered to me, you wrote something very beautiful to me. I will do as you recommend, will behave as you recommend. So that was the beginning of a pathway. That was the beginning of our correspondence. Salvatore became sort of bulimic. He wanted to redeem himself by writing. So he started to write to me. He decided to attend a course, and he only had attended the third year of compulsory education, and then he was simply expelled from the schools. So he decided to attend several courses, and he was willing to show his willingness to be different. He wanted to, and he told everybody, I've changed. I will never be a saint, but I've changed. And that was the case. It was true. So this is the last element of learning that I can offer you with my story, if you are willing to read it. No man is entirely contained in one simple gesture that he may make. Along with one of the letters, I decided to send him a book. And the book that I thought about sending, was one of the books of my bookshelf, Siddhartha by Hermann Hesse, who wrote, no man is entirely samsara or totally Siddhartha. No man is totally evil or totally good. So guided by this indication, by this statement, he recovered self-esteem, and for 15 years, 20 years, he fought as much as he could. He was, thanks to the support of my accompaniment. So I accompanied him during his imprisonment. This is something I would like to underline. Although there's a need for a severe punishment when needed, even in this case, everybody should remember that the time for the atonement, the time of duration of detention, and this is a different time. Time can lead to changes. So in jail, first of all, the inmate should not be left alone. And this gives me the chance to thank all the population, all the volunteers, and all the professionals, the educators, for instance. I would have to thank all the people who work and who are in the jails to remind all the inmates that they are not alone if they want. And this integrates one of the most beautiful admonishments which I happened to read, a sentence by Gibran, a poet from Lebanon, and he wrote in 1920. He wrote it in 1923, but it is still very topical. You walk together as in a procession. You are the way, the path, and the pilgrims. When one falls, he or she falls in favor of who is behind him or her. And he or she also falls for those who are in front of him, who, although they have faster feet, they have not removed the stone. So this is a due accompaniment. This is a recognition of the solid nature of the offended community and the offender, and the inmates may be one of the possible solutions of a problem, of the evil and of punishment, which is a problem that cannot be solved.
Io prima non ho usato un aggettivo che mi sento di usare adesso. Questo libro per me è stato proprio commovente, perché l'avete sentito, anche se sintetizzato dalle parole di Fassone, si diceva stamattina nell'incontro sulla giustizia riparativa che la giustizia è relazione. Pensate che cambiamento di prospettiva, sembra una cosa di un altro pianeta. Colui che per le circostanze della vita e anche per la sua libertà si è trovato in una situazione di conflitto radicale con lo Stato, con la vita, 15 omicidi, capomafia per quanto giovane, che si affida e fa una promessa e fa ripetute promesse di cambiamento a colui che l'ha condannato. Quindi a colui che gli ha dato l'ergastolo. È un rovesciamento, è un rovesciamento, la giustizia è capovolta, come sentivamo, e al tempo stesso devo anche veramente ringraziare il dottor Fassone per aver come ceduto, fatto prevalere la propria umanità, la propria inquietudine rispetto all'umanità all'umanità di quella persona a cui si è trovata davanti, rispetto anche a un ruolo delicato, perché non è per nulla scontato anche questo aspetto che il Presidente della Corte di Cassazione che ha condannato inizi un rapporto col detenuto di questa natura. Questo ci fa capire che c'è veramente una prospettiva di riparazione, di vincere il male, pur con le dovute cautele, con la legittimità di una civiltà giuridica che ha creato nel tempo il metodo del processo, della giustizia, dell'attenzione anche alle vittime della giustizia, ci mancherebbe altro, però c'è veramente una prospettiva diversa. In questa prospettiva il problema dell'ergastolo sicuramente stride, è contraddittorio, ma come può una persona, uno Stato forte, uno Stato illuminato, deve dare una seconda possibilità alla persona che dimostra di essere cambiata, di aver compreso il proprio errore e di volerlo riparare. E questo significa concretamente anche una normativa che lo permetta. Quindi io penso che anche se viviamo in un'epoca in cui soprattutto i mass media, ma non solo, ci buttano addosso molti slogan che incitano alla vendetta, alla paura, e questo per, se vogliamo, che comprensibile reazione ci fa essere molto preoccupati delle situazioni di devianza che ci circondano, questo non può vincere. Invece sulla speranza che si possano trovare forme diverse di affrontare la situazione per recuperare uomini che sono fatti di male e di bene e che sono al fondo tutti uguali. Mi ricordo in una mostra delle carceri che avevamo proposto tanti anni fa che la scoperta di un detenuto che si chiamava Joshua, che diceva: il cuore dell'uomo è veramente uguale, il cuore è uguale in ogni uomo, e questo è il punto di partenza. Do la parola adesso al dottor Gherardo Colombo. Il dottor Gherardo Colombo è stato magistrato, noi ci conosciamo da tanti anni ai tempi di Tangentopoli in qualche interrogatorio. Posso assicurarvi che io ero contento di fare gli interrogatori col dottor Colombo perché era quello con cui si riusciva a gestire meglio l'interrogatorio. In quei momenti non era semplice.
Non nel senso che ero stupido.
No, assolutamente. E poi, ma ce lo racconterà lui, a un certo punto è stato anche in Cassazione, quindi dopo essere stato in procura, che è stato anche magistrato di Cassazione, ha deciso di uscire da magistratura per dedicarsi a un tipo di attività diversa, ma che aveva come scopo comunque quello di tentare di risolvere comunque i problemi della giustizia e della legalità e della giustizia, ma vorrei che ce lo raccontasse lui in sintesi, che è molto meglio. Grazie.
Molto volentieri, grazie. Dunque, vediamo se...
So, well, let's see if I can be brief. I have a lot of things to say. The first thing is that I'm really glad to be here. And, well, I'm really happy to be here to talk about these themes. So I would really like the meetings organizers to thank the meetings organizers for the invitation. Then, I think you always noticed, or rather you always recognized the great value of Elvio Fassone. I've known him for like 40 years. I started my job as a magistrate in 1964, and I think we met around that time, and Elvio was really a reference point, a strong one. He was our master in a way. I learned a lot from him. Well, there were others as well, but I learned a lot from him. He's always been a special person, because he's capable of looking inside himself. And this is a testimony that is I'm really moved, I must admit this, because this is a testimony of great value. Not all judges have this need, this strong need. So, Elvio, this need, if you allow me, to start this path of recovery justice, because what you did is exactly this. Elvio, if I say something wrong, please just tell me, interrupt me. Anyway, so he said that he's been really stressed, and he had really many difficulties in carrying out this function as a magistrate. Not all judges are like this. There are judges who really feel this burden. That is to say, the burden of condemning other people to spend their whole life in prison. And there is also the burden of knowing that you are obliging those who live with these people, as for instance, in this case, Rose, the fiancée, to suffer from the absence of this person. So, well, that was not easy for him at the end of the process of the trial, because it needed to be understood by the man he condemned. And this is where the path began. And it produced these effects, those effects that should always be the outcome of this kind of path, that is to say, the understanding that what you have in front of you is another person. Rather, last words that make us, I think, understand that the person is not defined by one single gesture, one single deed, because life is some kind of movie, some kind of film, not just a photograph, and not just a single image. So, well, I believe
Tosoni ha già accennato.
Well, we have already mentioned this morning's meeting. I believe that we have a lot of troubles. Well, that was actually a meeting that was extremely interesting because of its contents, its value. It was really extremely fascinating. Well, I think that we should really ask ourselves, or rather should look for an answer to the question, what is justice? Why are we attached to a series of stereotypes according to which, in some way, we continue to see justice as something that is connected with revenge? We don't even realize this. Well, we know each other, we can call each other by name even though we are in front of a public, right? Okay, so this fact that the process, the trial, the criminal trial is in a way a reminiscence of the university, but it doesn't really reflect our everyday reality. So what is justice? Because if we think that justice means taking the others into consideration, then we really need to upturn our concept of justice, according to which, and this is a concept that is really heavy for us from the cultural point of view, and it makes it impossible for us to abandon this contradictory perspective in order to find something different.
Questa mattina
this morning, Marta Catania, while talking or introducing the theme, talked about dignity, and this is the word that actually marked the second half of last century. Just before that, we reached a different idea of being together. Up to that moment, people were together on the basis of a value of discrimination for a series of reasons that had their climax in 3 events: Second World War, the Shoah, and the use of the atomic bomb. So that's when we started to think that we could not possibly go on like that. And if we continue to go on like this, we will not have a future. So that was actually the trigger that led to, for instance, the Assembly of the United Nations, the Council of Europe, to change our way of being together, basing it on the acknowledgement of our mutual dignity. So let's think about it. If traditional justice that we have inherited from previous periods was based and justified by discrimination, when we reject discrimination and take as a starting point the acknowledgement, the mutual acknowledgement of our dignity, then we will have to really think if it is possible to have the idea of justice that we had in the past. Our criminal code actually dates back to 1930, when discrimination was actually prevailing. Can we really think that this code can be suitable for this new period and all that happened since 1945? With the rejection of discrimination and the adoption of universal dignity as fundamental value, I think we should question this. Do you think that our code is still, or rather our justice is suitable for our times, when its response is always a punishment that goes against the dignity of people? Well, maybe I'm wrong, we will talk about this, but this great feelings that you had, this search for legitimation, this idea, like Elvio did, to look for the person you had sentenced, you had condemned. If he didn't write that letter, if he hadn't written that letter, following the advice of his wise wife, he would have suffered. So, well, because in a way he felt, in this overturning of roles, he felt guilty because he had deprived this person of his freedom. And it was only this person that could have actually, in a way, that could have pardoned him. And I think this can actually go hand in hand with the traditional justice. But traditional justice should be enriched by becoming something different. You tell me when I have to stop, because I have a timer here, but it doesn't really work. So let's see if you understand me, because, well, we work in strange ways. Often we use these systems of justice in our everyday life with the people who live around us, who live with us. So if one of our children makes something wrong, we do not reject them forever. sometimes we try to, yes, actually punish them, but what we want to do is to recover our relationship to our children, to our son or daughter who has committed something that is against us. But we do this, for instance, there are a lot of examples, simple ones. We do this, for instance, when you are driving, and or rather when you are walking along a street, and someone crosses your path without paying attention, and in a way you feel like expressing your annoyance. And maybe this is done also in a kind of violent way. But if this person just, turns around and says or apologizes or says sorry, everything changes. That very strong reaction that was prompted by the initial deed just dissipates. So, well, I think that this recovery justice system is something we all know. We actually forgive our partners, our wives and husbands. When you come back home and your wife tells you, "Did you buy bread?" "No, I didn't. You didn't tell me to." "Of course I did. I told you like a dozen times," so on and so forth. So this doesn't mean that in the end there is a big row and a violent one. So, well, why is this? Because we can recover that relationship that even from a dispute on the purchasing of bread could really be questioned. But this needs to teach us something also in other spheres, in other sectors. For those who committed a crime, and, well, from stealing a car to killing someone and so on, we need to bear in mind this idea according to which those who have done something wrong need to be the object of something wrong. So that's not so far from the Hammurabi Code in Egypt. And, well, this is a form of blindness, so to speak. Why should we legitimate this kind of response when someone does something that goes against the criminal code? I do not want to take into account other aspects. There are crimes that change, and criminal crimes then are no longer criminal offenses. So, well, there are a lot of things that changed during over time. So why should we have this kind of idea? Maybe there are very profound roots, so that we see revenge as a behavioral principle. But maybe there's more, I don't know. Maybe imprisonment is paradoxically freeing your soul, because it makes us, well, if the bad guys are in prison, that means that we, who are free, are good. So this is very reassuring. So it's very difficult for us to think that we could no longer have prisons, because sometimes it is difficult to tell what is good from what is evil. So we need to have external points of reference to reassure us. How much time do I have left? So it would be different if, following our constitution that was, well, written about 70 years ago, in 4 to 5 months, it will be the anniversary of the entry into force of the Italian Constitution. So, if it were true what the Constitution envisages for everyone, starting from this assumption that all citizens, all people have their dignity, so they are important, to make it simpler. Well, if we follow this reasoning, criminal sentences could not go against this sense of dignity. So, well, jails should then guarantee good hygienical conditions, health conditions, education, work, personal relationships, and so on. Any kind of violence, physical or psychological, against anyone whose freedom is limited. So we no longer call it a jail. If that is what the Constitution envisages, then it would be in line with the recovery justice, because it would be the exact moment when lacking such a measure could become dangerous for the others, and then, well, he would not have the chance to carry out his dangerous behavior. The Constitution talks about imprisonment in just one article, that is to say, article number 13, preventive imprisonment. When the Constitution talks about sanctions and sentences, it never talks about imprisonment. As, for instance, parole has public works and services and so on. So let's think about a series of responses to this transgression, to where imprisonment is really, as it is envisaged by the Constitution, our very last solution. Well, where all the other possible solutions are inadequate. So here maybe we could have a change in the point of reference that actually finally coincides with what is needed to make sure that this new point of reference is respected. And here there is room for recovery justice.
Io dovevo parlare di tutt'altro, mi avevi chiesto una cosa prima.
Concedetemi la battuta, non so.
Well, allow me to say something. Well, it doesn't seem that we've listened to one of the magistrates, one of the magistrates of the so-called Bribesville scandal. But what is interesting is that from his experience in that situation, 1992, and other situations, he was able to grasp the failures, the shortcomings, and what can be improved. Grasping all the elements that may enable a person with dignity to take life back in his or her own hands. Well, the picture of jail, well, he wouldn't even like to call it jail, Well, the image of jail is an image which in some situations, for instance, in case we have the presence of lots of volunteers making jails more human, there are rare examples in Italy, alas, rare examples, and in these examples was something extraordinary happens. The repeated crimes decrease sharply, because if you are treated in jail like a beast, and if in jail you cannot imagine anything different from repeating the crimes, if you don't have any possibility to learn to do a job or to learn a profession, and you live with many other inmates in the same prison cell, of course you cannot think about going back to society as a different person. I will tell you that I was asked whether I wanted to sleep with other people in a hotel. But now, well, when I was younger, it wouldn't have been a problem. And this time I wanted to have a single room. So just imagine what inmates can feel and can live, sleeping with 5, 6 inmates whom you didn't choose. And if you serve a sentence, a jail sentence, in an environment in which all the conditions you have are not human, you will simply go out of jail and repeat your mistakes because you didn't have a chance to redeem your life. But where inmates are supported, accompanied, aided, and if they are not simply judged for what they've done, but if they are only considered for their dignity, well, the problem of repeating crimes decreases sharply to 15%. So this is a revolution. How can the authorities not understand that this is a revolution and that this is beneficial for the entire society? And it is also a saving when it comes to when it comes to costs. An inmate is an incredible expense for the entire community. So if we are not convinced about redemption, about the possibility to recover criminals from a human point of view, we should be persuaded by economic reasons. Why is it so difficult from a social, political point of view to talk the way we are talking about? We're talking now about alternative forms of punishment, on life imprisonment, to talk about ways to make jails more human, ways to support volunteers. Well, everybody's always keen to talk about this theoretically, but then in practice, all these measures are not implemented. So since you were also a politician, policymaker, I would like to know what you think about this. Why is it so difficult? Well, open the papers, any paper, and read about the facts of Barcelona. A person who killed 14 people last year on the promenade of Nice. 80 people were killed by a van. Corruptions, the fires of this summer, the killing of women. Are we really prepared to state that the man is not entirely contained in that gesture? Of course, we need to be prepared, but not now. We are still not prepared. When I said we should go back to talk about the time as it is conceived in jail, well, this is what I meant. There's a time of the crime and the time for atonement. The time of the crime, of the offense, does not simply hit the victim. Indeed, and I will partially answer to your question, the crimes with an individual victim are a very little minority. Most crimes have victims that cannot be identified. Think about drugs pushing. Think about corruption. All these crimes have no victims that are identifiable, that are visible immediately. Whereas, in very serious crimes, you can find what Dostoevsky called a fracture, a break between a schism. The nickname of the protagonist of Dostoevsky's book means creator of a schism. So the offender produces a fracture that will have to be repaired, but in the meantime he creates a profound trauma to the community. This is why crimes need to be punished. It is necessary to give a punishment, if not for other things, only to confirm to the community that we reaffirm the values which the crime has offended. This is why we have a time for the crime. And luckily enough, the phenomenon is now being decreased. But what I cannot conceive is that there's a journalist soon after a crime going with a microphone to the victim and asking them whether they are ready to forgive the offender. Well, the history of mankind has reacted with a desire for revenge. And if it's better, if there is a third subject which represents the community, ideally. But then we also have a time for atonement. And in the time for atonement, everybody should get more, let's say, wiser. The community, the person condemned, well, every day a part of ourselves gets renewed. But the time for atonement serves to work and to think about what's happened from a mental point of view. If we think about ourselves 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago, you can all understand that we were all very different from our being now. So the criminal will also be different from the way he or she was 10, 20 years ago. And so recovering mankind and the people condemned must be integrated. One of the forms to achieve these results was described this morning, as well as by Gherardo in his beautiful book. One of the ways to recover and to make up for this fracture is mediation, and as a consequence, the forgiveness. The etymology of forgiveness, perdono, in Italian, is a maximum of presents, of gifts. When I donate an object, I donate something which is external from myself. But if I forgive, I give something of myself. Resentment is inevitable because we are the sons and daughters of the of the brain, which is in the deepest part of our head. We are similar to reptiles in many instances. Claudio Magris said that a man has the impossibility of innocence. We are imbued with violence because in the Cambrian period, this is what men took in. Well, we have instincts. For instance, the ancient instinct or to eat or to be eaten. So this is one of our instincts. But we are also the results of the evolution, and so we need to follow the pathway of the criminal, of the offending party, remembering that the man is not always contained in one single gesture, and that no man is always equal to himself. So people change. So how can we extend this restorative justice so that it can cover the high rate of criminally relevant situations, which does not allow for victims and criminals? I think that we should pass through the myth of Cain. I know that the audience is keen on this. But Cain is the myth, a myth of a different justice, the restorative justice. If we read this myth of Genesis number 4 in a modern way, we can detect that there are some snapshots. Well, the first scene is the contestation of the charge. What have you done? The blood of your brother asks for revenge. So Yahweh was severe. Cain, you must consider that you've done something very serious. The second scene is the recognition of guilt. We always listen to indicted saying that they are serene, that they are quiet, that they have no fears. But Cain acknowledged he was guilty. And he said, it is my fault. And those who see me can kill me. Then we have the third scene, the justice of Yahweh. It will not be this way. You will go, but I will place a sign on you, and those who will see you will not kill you. And if they kill you, they will be punished 7 times as harder. So Yahweh's justice is higher than the justice of man. Then we have a fourth scene, which is normally neglected. And then Cain went to the land of Nod in front of Eden. He met his wife, who gave birth to Enoch. And then Cain became a builder of towns. Cain became the builder of town, the maximum of the crime with the maximum of social engagement. So this is a possible and necessary way out to reach the thesis that was promoted by Gherardo earlier, reducing the detention in jail as much as possible. We do have restorative justice at present, but it exists in very limited amounts. Well, first of all, we should link this kind of justice to strong elements. Please, you will forgive me for using Latin, but I need to resort to Latin. Legal experts said, and the speaker is quoting from Latin, if you have done something evil, you will suffer something evil. So this symmetry restores the balance that was ruined, spoiled by a crime. So now the sensitivity wished by Gherardo, by myself, and by the speakers of this morning, well, replaces this with another Latin sentence. Namely, you've done something evil, now you will do something good. So the pivot of the first antithesis is malum, evil. You've done evil, you will suffer it. The pivot of the second antithesis is actio, the action. You've done evil and you will now do good. Here is where we hopefully can direct criminal policy, because politics is the understanding of a phenomenon in its complexity. Well, everybody would like the victim and the offending party to shake their hands, but in many instances this is not possible. So if we are more convinced in promoting restorative justice, in which the interlocutor is not an invisible individual, but the entire community, which is always there as a party, the other part of a schism, well, we can recompose this problem. Restorative justice is not sufficiently known when it comes to being for the benefit of the entire community. The justice of the peace knows restorative justice, but it's a limited amount of cases, or it's contemplated in the laws against racism and in the laws referring to drugs. So this is applied and implemented in only very rare cases. I believe that justice should make an effort to increase the use of restorative justice. I know it's not easy, since I've had an active part in drafting the justice of the peace, which dates back to 2000. So after 17 years, it's been implemented just limitedly, because it's a complex issue, because we need to resort and to have a fruitful dialogue between the penitentiary administration, the surveilling magistracy, the ministry, the local entities, which need to provide for the funds, the local entities which should be in charge of envisaging alternative measures. So not all the inmates can do everything. Most of them are not able to do everything. So we would need a funding which would be in any case less than the cost of an inmate in jail. And all these elements would enable the community to shake hands with one another. I've experimented this. I've experienced this in some occasions. For instance, after cutting the grass of the gardens in front of a station, well, the community said, okay, if this is the action, I would agree with it. So this is the effort which lies before us, in addition to the emotions which were described during today's session.
And now I leave the floor for 5 minutes to Gherardo Colombo. Unfortunately, we have limited time, but then I will draw some conclusions. So, well, we talked about forgiveness, to pardon, and well, I would like to understand from your own experience, from your past experience, so this system that you actually do not share, why wasn't this possible? Why is this a situation so negative? Well, I hope I'll be very brief, but you can, well, stop me when you want. because I wanted first to say that maybe I've not been clear enough when I talked about discrimination. When we moved from discrimination to the respect of dignity. Discrimination means instrumentalization of a person, so slavery, the fact that women were actually subdued, so by man, so subjugated by man. So that was just to make it clear. That I think there is another aspect that I think is important. This restorative justice is a path that personally is very difficult, and it is more difficult than the real suffering that you experience when you actually stay in prison from the emotional point of view, because you really have to question yourself, because it is really an effort that you have to make, and because to admit one's responsibility is not something easy. And then now I'll answer your question. Well, Mr. Tosoni says I used to be the prosecutor of Bribeville in Italy. Actually, I've been a judge for many different years in Italy. Then I had some difficulties because since abductions were very common at that time, I really had problems in accepting the kind of sentence that was foreseen. Then we actually made investigations that led us to think that we decided that crime is, not the crime of everyday people, so to speak, but I'm talking about very serious crimes that since I've never liked prison, but I thought that maybe it was in a way conducive to some sort of education. Then at the end of that period, we did not actually understood how this corruption system worked, and then gradually I realized that this system doesn't work in terms of justice. When I started to work as a judge, justice didn't work. When I left, justice worked even less. So, I felt like a plumber who is called to repair the tap in a house. And so it says, maybe I have to go and look at rather than the tap, I have to look at the pipes. And then it goes downstairs, it goes to work in the cellar. And when it finally works on the pipes in the cellar, the water comes out from the tap in the kitchen. So that is exactly what I did. I've wondered, maybe there is something that we have to take into account that goes beyond appeal courts and accused people. And so in the end, I found my pipes, so to speak. That is to say, the relationship between us and the rules, the existing rules. If we cannot understand why we have these rules, those rules that put us in front of anything else, then, this is why we continue to cause disasters. The problem is in our way of thinking. Then there is the measurement of justice, which needs to be derived from the way we think. So, I had a lot of problems and difficulties, just like you did. But for me, it was really a trauma every time that when I was working as a judge, a mom with a child 4 years old would ask me to get permission to meet her husband, the father of the child, who was imprisoned. If I could actually justify the fact that this man was in prison, I could not possibly justify the fact that I had taken that father away from his child. So, well, if you go on doing this profession, you come to know more about how people live in prison. 69% of repeated offenses is a very high percentage, and it's actually committed by people who come out of prison. So, well, this is just an illusion for us to think that imprisonment can help. So our relationship with the others, in general, we have really to ask ourselves, where do we get the power to make other people suffer? So that's why I'm calling upon you to ask you to think about this. This is not something that can be changed overnight, but we need to have a final goal, a final purpose that needs to be a clear purpose, because we cannot just say, I want to go there, and then we take the opposite direction.
La prima riflessione è che
the first remark I would like to make is that we need to have a goal, but first of all, we must have a common objective, a common goal. And the fact that the speakers' contributions have highlighted that the aim is that of reaffirming courageously, with no exceptions, the dignity of a person is something which unites us all, either laymen or religious people. This is a great value. And then we are all called upon to work. And I would like to close by giving you this recommendation to commitment by Pope Francis to the National Association of Criminal Law. Just a few words. All the Christians and the men of goodwill are then called upon today to fight not only for the abolition of the death sentence, either legal or illegal, but also for the improvement of conditions in jail, in the respect of human dignity and the dignity of people deprived of their liberty. And I connect this with a life imprisonment. In the Vatican, there is no longer life imprisonment. Life imprisonment is a death penalty hidden. We are all called upon to collaborate and to work together so that all the things we've said this morning and this afternoon in time can become a reality. I need to give you a final notice. As you know, the meeting continues and relies on volunteering, and of course it has a cost. So I would like to invite you all to donate, to give your contribution by going to the desks where you can read the writing Dona Ora to support the meeting. Thank you again and enjoy the rest of the evening. Thanks you to the guests. Thank you very much.